Hi, my name is Leah Day, and today I'd like to tell you a little bit about fabric marking. In order to mark your quilt, in order to mark a design, a feather, or a stencil, or something that you have designed yourself on paper, you need to be able to mark your quilt and get that exact design on the quilt surface in an easy way. There's two marking pencils that I love the most. One's a pen, one's a pencil, and I'd like to share with you a little bit about them and answer some questions that you might run into along the way. So let's get started. The first pen I'd like to tell you about is the Fineline water-soluble marking pen. It's a blue water-soluble pen that marks on lighter fabrics. The one thing that you want to make sure you do is that you prepare your fabric before marking your quilt, if this is the entire quilt or just a block, if that's what you're working on. You want to go on ahead and do any pressing, any amount of stabilization. If you want to use starch, go on ahead and use starch, and make sure to give it a good solid press before you mark. The reason is that you can heat set this marker. If I was to mark first, then hit it with my iron, then I would risk heat setting. So you want to be really careful about that. Also, after marking your quilt, do not place this in your car. Do not put the quilt in a hot car and leave it there. Don't put it in a hot place in a sunny window. This is a sensitive pen. It's a really awesome pen and it definitely washes out in water, but only if you're careful with your quilt from the time that it's marked to the time that you finish quilting it. So just keep that in mind. Now I want to show you marking this little stencil right here on the fabric, and you can see just how easy it is with this pen. It produces a really nice solid blue line, so it's easy to follow whenever you are quilting. And that's really important because if you can't see what you're doing, if you can't see your marks, that is really frustrating, and it's a good way to go blind because you're just sitting there squinting at your quilt trying to figure out what you marked and not able to figure out where those marks are and where you should be quilting. And it really is very time consuming if you have to stop and check and look for where you were supposed to be going. So I love this pen, particularly for whole cloth quilts. If I'm working on a white whole cloth quilt, I have always used these Fineline pens in order to mark them. And you can see, I'm going to take the stencil away, I haven't finished it, but you can see just what a beautiful mark that makes on the surface of the fabric. And it's very easy to follow that mark whenever you're free motion quilting. So now let's talk about some darker fabrics. What happens if you are wanting to mark on something like this? Well, for that, of course, the Fineline blue pen is not going to really work very well for that, simply because it's blue and on black it's just not going to show up. So for anything darker than, well, really anything with more texture or darker, any medium tone, dark tone fabrics, I use the Fons & Porter ceramic marking pencil. And there's a lot of different things I love about this pencil. Number one, it uses ceramic lead, and let me try and bring it in here. You can really see how tiny that lead is, which means you're going to get a really fine mark. You can see those marks on the fabric right there. It's really fine. It's not going to be one of those thick, bulky chalk marks. I find those really obnoxious because when your mark is so wide on the surface of your quilt, you're going to end up wondering, well, do I quilt to the outside of that really wide line or to the inside? And some of those chalk markers produce like 1/8 of an inch wide mark on your quilt. Now that's good and okay if that's what you're going for, but I like the fine, really thin line, so that way I know exactly where my line's supposed to be, where I marked it, and it's supposed to look like that. So this is the ceramic pencil that I like. I like that it has refillable lead, so you just put the refills, pop them in right there. It also has this excellent eraser. It's a huge eraser, and that's actually how you erase the marks. There's two different ways to erase it. You can brush it off, and really, it's going to take a little bit of effort to brush it off simply because, obviously the marks are meant to stay in place for as long as you're quilting. But the other way to get rid of them is to erase them off with the eraser. And it's really nice that you have such a big eraser so you're not going to run out. So you can see that works really well. And it's super easy to mark with. Again, I'm just tracing through this stencil. I've got more than enough space within the stencil to get my pencil in there. It produces a really nice fine line, so that way you know exactly where you're supposed to be quilting. Okay, one last question a lot of people have about marking fabric, and that is, what about the busy fabrics? What about fabrics like this, which this is a 1920s reproduction fabric. It's really bright, it's really colorful. I can sit here and try and mark something. I'm going to try and mark like a heart shape with this ceramic marking pencil, and you know, you really can't see it. If I try and mark with the Fineline pen, I mean, I might be able to follow that, but really I'd be spending most of my time guessing as to where those marks were. So here's the rule of thumb. If you have a fabric that you can clearly see a mark, well then clearly that is a fabric that you can mark with a specific quilting design. If you have a quilt that is full of busy prints, things that you can't see your marks, then give yourself a break. Don't mark your quilting pattern. Instead, cover that quilt with an all-over quilting filler design and be done with it. If you want to, you can stitch it in the ditch. Do something along those lines where you don't need marking in order to finish that quilt. And there's two reasons why I advise this. Number one, if you can't mark it, you can't see your marks, there's no point in trying. And the second reason is, if you can't see your marks, chances are you're not going to be able to see that quilting design, that really elaborate marked stencil quilting design either. So there's no point either way. So don't waste your time with the busy prints, with the busy fabrics. Just cover them with all-over quilting. And you know, you can find tons of filler designs to stitch in all-over quilting style at the Free Motion Quilting Project. Now, about the two pens, you can get both the Fineline water-soluble blue pen and the Fons & Porter ceramic marking pencil at leahday.com. And we have a bundle so you can get the two of them together with a Mark Your Quilt kit. So definitely check that out at leahday.com. And until next time, let's go quilt.